From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
The race to become the next mayor of Providence is already a crowded one, but so far the ballot has just one Republican, Dr. Daniel Harrop. The Providence psychiatrist is all in, loaning his campaign $100,000. But with most thinking the Democratic primary will choose the city's next mayor, can the lone Republican convince a city where 84% voted for Obama that he's their guy? Our guest on the first half of Newsmakers, Providence mayoral candidate Daniel Harrop. Then, for many, it was George Orwell's 1984 in real life. Big Brother of 2013 was the National Security Agency. Edward Snowden's famous leak affected the American dialogue, according to the Pell Center for International Relations, and shows the report of the NSA's digital spying their story of the year. Our guest on the second half of Newsmakers, Pell Center Executive Director Jim Ludis and Pell Center Visiting Fellow G. Wayne Miller. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Joining me on the panel, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi. Dr. Harrop, welcome back to the program.
Thank you very much for having me today.
First question, why do you want to be mayor of Providence?
I think that we need a mayor who is not going to move on to another office, unlike our prior mayors. I think we need someone who's going to look at the long-term solutions for the city, in particular finances. The finances in the city have been kicked down the road each and every election. 8 years ago, I was complaining the city's heading towards bankruptcy. We don't have enough money in our pension fund. What do we see now? We see $250 million in a pension fund that needs to be funded at $1.2 billion. Nothing has been done, and nothing continues to be done while we get career politicians who are only looking to the next election.
Nothing has been done with the mayor of Providence. You know, he touts that he made concessions with the union. He got some money from the not-for-profits, you know, he's done some budget tightening. I've heard you say he only bought us 4 to 5 years. Where'd you get that number? Did you pluck it out of thin air? Did you sit down with a calculator?
You sit down with a calculator. And the nice thing in the last week is that Brett Smiley, one of the Democratic opponents, is saying the same thing. He's saying, you know, this didn't fix it. We've got to do something. He's not saying what he will do, but he too acknowledges that the next mayor needs to go and fix Providence finances.
All right, he said that on this program last week. What would you do differently? What would you go, if you were mayor, what would you change financially?
I think there are the biggest thing we cannot do is raise further taxes. We have the highest commercial tax rate in the nation, 2 years running. Can't be done raising taxes. There are small changes you can make. Look at the report on the recent overtime difficulties and the millions, the tens of millions that are going there. In the end, you've got to go back to the unions. And you've got to go back and renegotiate, especially the retirees' pensions.
How realistic is that?
It's realistic because we don't have the money to pay the pensions. The bottom line is there is not enough money to pay those pensions in the long run, so something has got to be done.
Dan, we're going to talk more about pensions and the financial stuff, but I want to ask you just on the politics of your bid for mayor. As Tim said in the intro, 84% of Providence voters went for Obama in November. Only 14% went for Mitt Romney. I mean, how can you win in such a Democratic city?
Well, you first have a wild Democratic primary. I mean, you have 5, maybe 6 candidates in the primary. You don't know who's going to emerge from that and exactly how popular that person will be. And I think if I continue, and the Providence Republican Party continues to push at these issues about the finances needing to be fixed, I think we'll get some treadway at that point. Now, on the other hand, we're in there to support the state party candidates too. I'm a big supporter of Mayor Fung, as are most of the other candidates in Providence at this point. If the mayor can get 35% of the Republican vote in Providence, he can be governor. He can't win with 20% of the Republican vote. So we need to get out there and push the Republican message of freezing taxes, lowering taxes perhaps statewide, and really doing a better economic job than the Democrats have done in this state for decades.
And what would be your message to an Obama voter who, you know, didn't like the Republican message in the 2012 election and says, well, Dan Harrop, am I going to get, you know, you're going to be John Boehner in City Hall, or would you tell him you're different than a national Republican?
Well, I fully realize we're going to have to compromise, and there's going to have to be working with the Democrats. There's 4% registered Republicans in Providence. I'm not denying that type of thing. But you need somebody in there who's going to be able to say, I'm sorry, no, we can't do this. I'm not looking to run for governor like our last few mayors. I'm not looking to run for senator. I'm looking to fix Providence at this point. I'm looking for a freeze on the tax, perhaps lowering if we can do that, or fixing the pension funds, as well as looking for education, which is my second biggest point. The 4 worst high schools in the state are in Providence. The second best as well, but the 4 worst are in Providence, and 6 of the bottom 9 are in Providence. That needs to be a focus as well.
You know, I'm interested by your pledge to never raise taxes in Providence, and I'm just wondering, isn't that easy to say? I mean, the city council is the one that authorizes spending there. Are you truly being honest with voters when you say, I won't raise taxes in Providence?
I will not propose taxes. I will not agree to a raise in taxes.
But you know what they hear? If you're mayor, taxes won't go up, and that's not true. You can't promise that.
I can't promise that. You're absolutely correct. The city council can do that. But if you have a mayor in there to cause a little trouble and to cause a little, to put their foot down about what needs to be done, you will get a much better effect.
All right, I want to switch gears a little bit. You told Go Local Prov that as a psychiatrist, you have dealt with an extraordinary number of firefighters seeking an accidental disability claim based on psychiatric issues. You know, I take it to mean that that number has gone up. Why do you think that is? What's happening?
Well, I think that, have you looked at the overtime that a lot of them are doing? That's a recurrent theme. It's nice to get the money, and I'm sure they are intrigued by the money. But I think people in many professions fall into this, well, I'll just do an extra shift here, an extra shift there, but they can't work 60, 70 hours a week. The paycheck is nice, and over the course of years, that takes a toll on them. So then they come with typical post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms because they don't have the time to defervest, to relax, to do other things in their lives that would reduce the pressure on their current jobs.
So I was being presumptive, but are you seeing that on the rise? Are you seeing more and more cases of
Yes.
this? All right. Go ahead, Ted.
Do you think, you mentioned before that Brett Smiley has said recently last week on this show that bankruptcy could be in the offing for the city. You were saying that in your last run. Do you think Angel Taveras made a mistake by not filing for Chapter 9 bankruptcy protection when the city's finances got so bad in 2012?
Well, he at least made a mistake by not negotiating harder with the unions and with those involved. To quote Rahm Emanuel, never let a good crisis go to waste. We had a Category 5 hurricane. I think the mayor had reduced it to a 4.5 hurricane, quite frankly. He should have at least negotiated further and fixed the problem for 12, 15, 20 years, which would be more appropriate. This is a 4 or 5 year fix, of which 2 years are already gone at this particular time. And that's now being recognized by the Democratic candidates as well.
But when you talk to city officials as they went through that, I heard over and over from them, they said, we have sat in those rooms with those retirees. They are adamant. They have Rhode Island Supreme Court decisions locking in their big COLAs and their current pension benefits, and they are not going to budge. And it was this or bankruptcy at this point. Do you reject that?
No, I don't reject that, but he then should have progressed along towards bankruptcy. We learned from Detroit in the last 2 weeks, those state laws mean nothing. Federal law trumps that. The Michigan State Constitution guarantees city pensions in Michigan. The federal court threw that out. Everything is on the table in Detroit with their bankruptcy at this point. No pension is guaranteed. And I think he should have gone to the retirees very clearly with that and started the process.
Mayor Taveras and some other city leaders want to crack down on prostitution in strip clubs. They want to do away with private booths where lap dances happen. And Taveras even wants a one-strike rule that if prostitution occurs in one of these establishments, they can automatically shut the club down. Do you support those initiatives?
Yes, I do support those initiatives.
The Rhode Island Entertainment Association, which represents a majority of the strip clubs in the city, say that would be a death sentence to their business, that these are important, that they're a big, actually, economic driver in the city. They employ a lot of people. Do you think they're an economic driver? Would you be worried about their business, or is it, oh well?
Whether or not they're an economic driver, it's not an appropriate economic source at this point. We need to find better economic
So would you
sources.
shut them down? Would you move to shut down strip clubs in Providence?
I don't think we have a right to shut them down. I would like to see them shut down. I think there are certain legal things we have to do. I think the booths are a good thing to get rid of at this point, because that's where the prostitution occurs, not on the floor with the strippers.
What do you think should happen with the Superman building? There's talk, Brett Smiley again last week said on this show that, you know, maybe there is a need for tax credit, some kind of subsidy to get that back in use. What's your opinion on that?
Well, it is a big sore on the city at this point. I am not in favor necessarily of credits as opposed to abatements of the taxes. We may need to come in and say, okay, we won't send the bill now, but you're going to get the bill in 10 or 15 years, and we're going to have a lien put on it so we eventually get our taxes. We in Providence cannot afford any more tax credits, any more tax forgiveness. We may, because it's such a huge economic driver, have to give the abatements. But, you know, there's a lot of first-class office space in Providence empty because of the highest commercial tax rates in the nation. And so it's not a simple problem.
What do you think about New York City's Stop and Frisk program? Would you implement it here, or like to see it here?
It's got mixed results. It's got very bad publicity. I would think that there are other ways better to do that. I would certainly listen to a public safety chair that I had confidence in regarding what to do. I don't think that the public relations loss is equal to the safety gain.
Do you have confidence in the current Commissioner of Public Safety? If you were mayor, would you keep Stephen Perry? Would you keep Colonel Hugh Clements, the head of the
I
police
actually like
department?
those two people. I like what they're doing, and I have no complaints with what they're doing.
Brett Smiley said on this program or elsewhere that he just feels like the city's unsafe right now, but stats show that crime is actually down. So do you agree with Brett Smiley, or do numbers not lie?
No, the numbers clearly show that crime is down. I think it could be better. I think there are certain segments of the city that are not safe, but I don't think the city on a whole is unsafe.
What's your vision for economic development and growth in where do you see Providence's sort of killer app in terms of what parts of Providence's economy could grow, lead to job growth, lead to property tax revenue growth? You know, do you see us being like Boston or Silicon Valley? Do you see it more like Pittsburgh? Where do you see economic optimism in Providence that you think as mayor you could help to grow?
Well, I think the Pittsburgh, explain that because I don't think people will know. I think it's the colleges and the universities that are our killer app. I think instead of nickel and diming them for $1 million here and $1 million there to get through this year's budget, I think what you need to do is form a long-term partnership with them. We have bad education in this city. Why couldn't Rhode Island College take over and run Mount Pleasant High School? Why couldn't Brown University take over and run Hope High School? They're blocks away from each other. Why couldn't we voucher so that parents have choice to go to these schools run by major universities so that we get our high school graduation rate, which is abysmal compared to other cities our size. It's below 75%. And at Mount Pleasant, it's like 55%. Why can't we get that up by leveraging our cities, our universities and colleges?
All right, Dr. Daniel Harrop, Republican mayor, candidate for mayor, thank you for joining us on the program.
Thank you very much for having me today.
When we come back, the 2013 Story of the Year, according to the Pell Center, we have their executive director, Jim Lutis, and a visiting fellow, G. Wayne Miller. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. To my right, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi. Our guest for the second half, Jim Lutis. He's the executive director for the Pell Center and visiting fellow at the Pell Center. G. Wayne Miller. We'll call you Wayne, if that's okay with you.
That is fine with me.
All right. So
not G-Money.
No, Wayne will do it.
All right, good.
Yeah.
So the 2013 Story of the Year, chosen by the Pell Center, was the disclosure of the NSA spying program. Jim, why was that the choice?
Well, the choice overall is about the story that we think is going to have the largest impact on public affairs going forward. And when we compared this against things like the selection of Pope Francis, the inability to get agreement on immigration reform in Washington, the shutdown of the federal government, even something like Sandy Hook, which as tragic as it was, really didn't shift the needle gun control or even mental health care in this country. We took a look at the impact that the NSA digital espionage has had both domestically in terms of our politics, in terms of the impact on American businesses globally, and the reaction of both friends and enemies abroad. And ultimately had to say this was the big story of the year.
You know, you brought up Newtown, and there hasn't been a lot of change policy-wise with gun control. What's been the change policy-wise with the revelation of the NSA story? I mean, they're still they just had a report that came out yesterday making recommendations. Right. A lot of it is secret, but you know, right. The Wall Street Journal had a couple of nuggets in there. So has there really been a big policy impact yet?
I think that we're seeing it dribble out in drips and drabs, and that's why this story has had such legs. Is that we believe that Snowden has divulged up to 200,000 documents. We've only begun to see pieces of it, and this is a story that will continue to evolve well into 2014, if not beyond. But internationally, we know that the Germans have grave concerns. Most of our allies have expressed grave concerns. Some of that is politics. They want access to things that they maybe didn't have access to before. But you can be guaranteed that our adversaries have certainly changed the way they're communicating. And we've seen an impact on American businesses. Companies like Google and Yahoo are gravely concerned because this cuts right to their bottom line.
And I think one of the other things that we factored in here pretty heavily wasn't simply the public policy, and I think you are seeing within the White House and certainly in Congress signs that is going to change in some fashion. We factored in the effect on the public dialogue, what people were saying, and I think a lot of individuals, certainly people that I know and people in the news, outside of the news, for the first time maybe just were paying attention to privacy, larger privacy issues, the fact that there exists the mechanisms to get into your personal email and into your different accounts, and quickly recapping how this happened. The Guardian wrote stories early in June, and the first story was that Verizon was being information from Verizon had been extracted by the NSA on phone data, one carrier, one slice of information. And as the story unfolded over the succeeding weeks and months, it was clear that the NSA was scooping all kinds of information from all kinds of carriers, domestically, internationally, indiscriminately, and storing and saving it in what I like to call the big, ugly, windowless building in Utah. People paid attention to this, and at the Journal, where we have been examining this issue too, we devoted a whole Sunday and we actually public occurrences on that too. So I think it had broad impact in terms of what people in general.
One of the interesting things you kind of mentioned it there, Wayne, is that the Snowden went to Glenn Greenwald at the Guardian. Glenn is a fiercely civil libertarian, bomb-throwing columnist type. He's certainly not your traditional investigative reporter like Tim's dad or someone like that, like we think of through the years. I mean, what do you make of the way the information came out and who Snowden went to? There's been a lot of debate within journalism about the way this information came out.
He went to two people. He went to the Guardian reporter and he went to a documentary filmmaker. And I think, I'm not sure what his motivation was to go to them, but in recreating what happened there, he established trust with them. Now, why he chose them, I don't really know. I'm guessing Greenwald was somebody he thought who would do exactly what Greenwald did. The documentary filmmaker, whose film has not come out, will probably have an amazing film. He established trust with them, sort of behind channels, deep web, or whatever you want to call it. And there was a long process, I would call it, of courting, where Snowden was essentially courting these people. They then eventually met with him, transferred, through a thumb drive, the data. So it was a trust relationship. And it's interesting to me that the Guardian broke this story and the New York Times and Washington Post, which of course later reported on it, were not the ones he had success with in terms of where he went.
Jim, Time Magazine chose Pope Francis as their Person of the Year. Many think it should have been Edward Snowden. What do you think?
Well, we actually had a conversation about whether or not the selection of Pope Francis and the energy that he's brought to the Catholic Church should be our story of the year as well. Ultimately, we thought on balance that the NSA story, we were very careful to not herald Edward Snowden. Different people can have different opinions about his role in this and his motivations. I am not a fan of Edward Snowden.
Why?
I think he's a criminal. At minimum, he's a criminal.
We disagree
Yeah,
here,
so,
I think.
okay, let's talk, because that was one of my
We
questions here.
absolutely-
Patriot, or should he be prosecuted, you know? So
Go ahead, Jim.
I am very strongly of the view that he should be prosecuted.
And people should know your background, Jim. You were a national security advisor to John Kerry. You worked in Congress for years, and that was a question I had for you, which was, did you have any qualms about highlighting this as someone who's been inside of government? And it sounds like, Wayne, you take the journalist perspective.
Well, so
Which I do, yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think that Edward Snowden is a criminal, and at minimum, and there may be other motivations of which we're still unaware. But from my perspective, this is a program that was authorized by Congress, reviewed by the courts, and deemed necessary by the Commander-in-Chief. To think that a 20-something-year-old computer tech can take it upon himself to decide that no, this needs to be exposed to the world.
But isn't the question here, which is a valid one, did the NSA go further than what Congress authorized? I mean, those questions are still unanswered, and many would argue if it weren't for Snowden, we'd still be in the dark about that.
Exactly.
But the totality of the damage that has been done to American capabilities at collection and various programs that we've been running. You know, one of the great advantages that we've had is that all of these networks run through American corporations. That will change as a result of Snowden's
Go
revelations.
ahead, Wayne, dive in on this. Why do you think?
Well, look,
so do you think he's a patriot?
That's kind of a strong word. I'm not sure I'd use the word patriot. I'm not sure I'd use the word hero. Whistleblower certainly would apply here. Here's why I like what he did. He opened up a discussion, we're having it here now, about something that was happening, essentially very secretive with our government, that has an impact on all of our lives, whether you're a big corporation or just Wayne Miller sending Tim White or Ted an email. We didn't know. Most of us didn't know that was going on. This is a conversation that has to happen. And as far as, you know, information that was leaked or revealed through Snowden that has harmed our national security interests, there probably has been some of that. I also will now take the other side of the equation here. The NSA is probably pretty smart and probably can figure out how to deal with that. Look at the reaction from Microsoft and Google and the big, you know, internet giants on Monday of this week. They wrote a letter and published an ad in the New York Times and elsewhere saying basically to Congress, do something about this. You are absolutely jeopardizing our business model, which relies on trust. The information that we all give to Facebook and Yahoo and whomever, the NSA is scooping it. And that's not good for business. We need to know this.
The irony in all of this is that we, every day, willingly share copious amounts of information with private sector companies. Every time you swipe that card at the supermarket, every time you ride through Easy Pass, you're being tracked, your consumer habits are being tracked, and we just turn
Sounds
that
like
over for
you're
free.
leading, so deal with it. Is that what you're saying? Like, the question is, what is privacy now?
Well, I think in the case of Snowden, it's a little bit of, in terms of what the NSA was doing, it's a little bit like gambling in the casino. And we can't express shock that it's there.
You know, the journalist here has been looking at privacy through our E-Wave series, and I'm rapidly coming to the conclusion, having written a lot of these stories and with another one coming up in another week, there is no such thing as privacy. I mean, literally, even the 10-year-old concept of privacy no longer exists. If you want to live in this modern world, you have got to have technology. You can't, unless you want to move to Idaho and live in a cave. You willingly give up all this. And so privacy certainly has changed as a concept, and I would argue there's a legitimate chance there is no such thing.
Wayne, you mentioned the Journal. We do have to ask, we talked about the Journal's potential sale on this show last week. I mean, just as a rank and file reporter and a veteran one, sort of what's been your reaction to this, and what's sort of the mood in the newsroom right now?
Well, my reaction was it was not a surprise. I think clearly, you know, we were headed in this direction. The reaction in the newsroom, the mood in the newsroom is we're hoping that whoever buys us continues to maintain the traditions of great journalism for which this great institution has stood since 1829 and in weekly form since 1820. So I think we're cautiously optimistic and hopeful that, you know, the right person will come and buy us. And, you know, they're buying a brand, but they're also essentially buying what we do as journalists. You know, they're buying us, you know, our services. So cautiously optimistic.
Because nothing is more important than what happens in this sandbox we like to call Rhode Island. I'm wondering if you two have an opinion. Jim, we'll start with you, on what should be the local story of the year. NSA is clearly the national, international story of the year. How about just here in Rhode Island?
Well, very quickly, I just think that the continuing struggles of the Rhode Island economy is probably the most dominant, most important story of the year locally.
Yeah, and you know, we were talking about this earlier. There's no better symbol of that than the Superman building. It went dark in April when Bank of America, I mean, it literally went dark. I guess they have the lights on the top, but there's no window lights on. There's nothing there when Bank of America left in April. Gone. And there it is standing in the heart of our city, the heart of our capital city, a great symbol of the economy. So I would agree with Jim that that certainly is one of the top stories. On the positive side, you know, the rollout of local Obamacare, the health exchange, in Rhode Island went flawlessly. I was on their website this morning. I'd never been on it, and it works. You can click through. It's easy to navigate. So I think that also would be one of our top candidates. The passage of gay marriage is certainly one of our top would be one of our top stories, and the continuing churn in the race for governor, which has just been a fascinating year already, and we're not even into 2014. Right. I personally am looking forward to 2014.
We are out of time, and I did want to ask you about story in the public square.
Sure.
So what I will do on our website, on the Newsmakers website, we'll make sure we put a link to that and to the Pell Center, if you want to read more about their story of the year. I want to thank Jim Ludes and Wayne Miller for joining us on the program. Ludus, thank you. And our first half guest, Dr. Daniel Harrop. If you missed any of it, it's on WPRI.com. For Ted Nesi, I'm Tim White. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.
And you said I would mess it up.